they could stop the North Koreans, who had no experience of fighting a Western army. On the morning of July the 5th, Task Force Smith dug in and prepared to face the enemy at the start of America's first battle against an Asian communist army. Tanks appeared in the distance.
Task Force Smith was supposed to be an arrogant display of strength, which would cause the North Koreans to immediately recoil when they saw who they were facing. We thought that we could certainly stop the tanks.
Their anti-tank weapons could not stop the North Koreans. The T-34 tanks simply drove through their positions. Over a quarter of the Americans were killed, wounded, or captured.
The North Korean infantry then started to come up. Some started coming up the front of us, and it was raining, drizzling, cold, and we started taking casualties, and then we knew we were in trouble.
놈들은 겁에 질려서 우리하고 맞설려을 하지 못하고.
When we charged the Americans, they were too frightened to resist. They threw away their guns, held up their hands, and begged for mercy. We didn't shoot those who were begging for their lives, but ruthlessly shot those who were resisting.
And people started getting killed, you know, terrible emotional situation for every man there, 300 to 400 of us. So you know, my God, we're going to miss the regimental party next Saturday night. We're not going back to Japan, you know. We didn't have the whole story, at least at my level, and from that moment on, we were fighting for our lives.
By late morning, the battle was over. North Korea had scored its first victory against the Americans.
After the battle, we rested and had a meal. Dead Americans were lying all over the place with their mouths open. There was a man in our 9th squad, a real joker, who said the Americans are still hungry, even though they're dead. Here, have some earth. He then went round and shoved a handful of dirt into each mouth. We thought it was very amusing. So did the villagers who were passing by.
It is not that we weren't well trained, we were overmatched. Any more than an American high school football team can play in the Super Bowl. We were all right as a high school football team. We did not belong in the Super Bowl with the equipment we had.
The Northern Army's first act was to release thousands of political prisoners. There had been almost 10,000 in Seoul alone. A new administration was set up based on a re-established People's Committee made up of Southern communists who had taken refuge in the North and up to 60 National Assemblymen who had remained in Seoul, still recognized as the national capital.
It was okay during the initial period. For a week or two, nothing happened. We even approached to them and talked with them. There were all kind of communist cadres, members with the red armband on the street trying to explain how South Korea started war, and here was, after all, the North Korean army trying to liberate the motherland of southern part. It's to be accomplished in 3-4 days.
Less than 10% of the capital's population had left, and it was clear that a lot of the inhabitants were glad to see the back of Ri and his government. The American Central Intelligence Agency reported that more than half of Seoul's students are actively aiding the communist invaders, with many voluntarily enlisting in the Northern Army. The CIA also noted that the working class generally supports the North Koreans, while merchants are neutral and the intelligentsia continue to be pro-Southern. A North Korean correspondent covered the advent of the new order.
When the city was first liberated, the citizens of Seoul welcomed the soldiers of the Korean People's Army. I remember hearing the people say, "We'd heard the North Korean communist soldiers were a monstrous rabble with the horns of devils and red faces. But seeing them now, we can see they're the same as us. The soldiers are young and brave and handsome."
In the rush to leave Seoul, American diplomats had failed to destroy some sensitive documents.
In those days, nobody had invented a shredder. They all had to be burned on the roof. The only unfortunate omission that we made was that we failed to burn the personnel records, which were not classified. But the North Koreans got hold of those and made great use of them in going after the people who had worked for us.
They have a so-called the People's Court. They've been trying to execute families and government officials. They bring them up out, and a lot of communist sympathizers or communists right on the street. They sit on, and they start, this is government official so-and-so, or government families of government official so-and-sos, and ladies and gentlemen, what are you going to do with this Mr. Kim so-and-so? Well, shoot them. Well, what are you waiting for? You shoot them. Any objection?
Many others were imprisoned. Thousands more fled from the fighting and from the terrors, real or imagined, of a rule they did not know. On July the 7th, the Security Council asked the Americans to appoint a commander for United Nations forces in Korea. Truman chose MacArthur. A few days later, Syngman Rhee placed South Korean forces under UN command. The Australian Air Force was already in action.
From our high perch, it's not easy to sight objectives, but the Aussie pilots seek out the gooks like hounds on the scent.
People have forgotten that in those days, before and for a while after, the United Nations really mattered in this world, and that it did have considerable authority in various areas. And our commitment to Korea, partly because the Americans were involved, yes, let's not be silly about that, but it was, I believe, just as much a feeling that we should get into the business of collective security in the United Nations.
Collective security was a phrase which also appealed to the British Labour government. But Britain was short of troops and money.
We were committed to 7 divisions in Germany, and the chiefs of staff were at their wits' end to know how we were ever going to find that number. So their first advice was that we could not send any forces but one, and that was the ships on the Far East Station of the Royal Navy, that is, those based in Singapore and the advanced base in Hong Kong.
America wanted, and indeed received, contingents from all 5 continents. Eventually, 15 other nations sent forces. Rhee knew how to appeal to the West.
On behalf of every Korean man, woman, and child, I want especially to thank American, Australian, and British soldiers, sailors, and airmen who daily and nightly risk and give their lives in this distant land so that liberty and freedom shall not perish from the earth.
Most of the contingents had little idea why they were fighting in Korea, or even where it was. Least of all, whether they were defending liberty and freedom. Mobilization was underway.
The fact that communist forces have invaded Korea is a warning that there may be similar acts of aggression in other parts of the world. Free nations must be on their guard, more than ever before, against this kind of sneak attack. The free nations have learned the fateful lesson of the 1930s. That lesson is that aggression must be met firmly. Appeasement leads only to further aggression and ultimately to war.
Congress authorized the president to extend the draft and greatly increase military expenditure. Truman was also given powers to mobilize